The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
The labor landscape in Virginia changing, but not enough for organized labor. Meanwhile, a win for the UAW in Tennessee. And today on the show, we're going to talk about making progress on the Rail Safety Act. Welcome to the Tuesday, June 9th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Well, for the last couple of years, we've been talking a whole lot about rail safety, and there was some legislation that was proposed that didn't seem to go anywhere, but finally, it's happening. Our featured guest on the show today is Jared Cassity. Jared's been on the show a couple of times. He's with the SMART Union. That's the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Division. And he serves as National Safety and Legislative Director. The national website you want to go to is smart-union.org, smart-union.org. And the good news is this. The House Transportation Committee recently adopted an amendment to the Railroad Safety Act to what they call the Build America 250 Act that mandates, and this is crucial, mandates 2-person crews on freight trains. That's been a big issue for years now. Here's the other part. The act, which provides over $500 billion to fund federal highways, bridges, and transit programs, now includes new safety requirements for shipments of hazardous materials and increases federal oversight measures over trains. We all know what happened a couple of years ago. It was in February of 2023 when the Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. That was a national story, and that prompted a number of lawmakers to say, hey, we got to do something about rail safety. And like I said, nothing's happened until now. So that's why we have Jared Cassity. Is it enough? Well, stay tuned. We'll find out from Jared in a few minutes. And now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. Virginia's new governor, Abigail Spanberger, has signed into law a broad package of employment reforms that will reshape the state's labor landscape. Now, the new laws include paid sick leave for all public and private employees, a payroll-funded paid family and medical leave program providing up to 12 weeks at 80% of average weekly wages, a salary history ban, pay transparency requirements for job postings, and a phased minimum wage increase to $15 per hour by January of 2028. The package also prohibits non-compete agreements for healthcare professionals and expands the Virginia Human Rights Act to cover employers with as few as 5 employees, down from 15. Now, most provisions will take effect at the beginning of July, so just a couple of weeks away, with the paid family leave program beginning benefit payouts in December of 2028. Mind you, a similar paid sick leave bill passed both chambers last year with bipartisan support, only to be vetoed by then-Governor Glenn Youngkin. Notably, however, this latest legislation comes on the heels of Spanberger's veto. This was last month. We talked about it on the show, of a bill that would have expanded collective bargaining rights to roughly 500,000 public sector workers. Now, Virginia currently allows localities to opt into public sector bargaining under a framework established in 2021 However, only a handful have done so. The vetoed bill would have made collective bargaining mandatory statewide. And as we reported on the show, her veto drew very sharp criticism from labor unions who had supported her gubernatorial campaign. So hopefully they'll bring that up again. Maybe she'll change her mind. Maybe. Workers at, and I hope I pronounce this name correctly, Cassity Logistics out in Chattanooga, Tennessee, have voted 2-1 in a National Labor Relations Board election to form a union with the UAW. Final vote count was 183-91. The workers provide all materials handling for the Volkswagen assembly plant there in Chattanooga. Quincy Quarles is a forklift driver for Cassity Logistics, and he said, today history was made, and we are very grateful. The workers began organizing their union after they saw the historic and life-changing contract won by VW workers earlier this year. They overcame a strong anti-union campaign from the company and outside anti-union consultants in the final weeks right before the election. Workers were motivated to organize their union due to a persistent lack of raises, disrespect, and favoritism from management, and being forced to switch to lower-paid jobs. Tim Smith is the Region 8 director of the UAW. Tim's a great guy. In fact, we should get him back on the show to talk more about this because he's been working hard, especially in those right-to-work states. And he said, Cassity logistic workers voted to join their brothers and sisters in UAW Local 42. They watch VW workers organize their union and win their first contract, and they decided they wanted that for themselves. He went on to say the workers there overcame an anti-union campaign to ensure they have a voice at work and they get their fair share. I'm proud of them and proud to welcome them to the UAW. Who are we? We are the UAW. Love you, Tim Smith. Great job. Great job there. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, rail safety. We're making progress. Is it enough? We'll talk about it next right here on America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Iron Workers. You can find more at ironworkers.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's LIUNA.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. AWF Union Podcast. By far, one of the topics that I want to talk about, and I'm sure you want to hear about the most, is safety, worker safety. And today we're going to specifically talk about rail safety. And I'll tell you, ever since what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, a little over 3 years ago, we've been talking about it. There's been some legislation, didn't seem to be going anywhere, but things do happen in Washington, sometimes not as fast as you want them to happen. Joining us as our featured guest today is Jared Cassity. Jared is with the Smart Transportation Division. That's the sheet metal workers, air, rail, and transit. Smart-union.org is the website you want to go to. And Jared is going to talk about what happened here in the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Kind of out of the blue here, but when the President of the United States wants something to happen, well, a lot of people listen to him. Jared, welcome back to America's Workforce. Thanks for joining us today. Long time coming, no doubt about it. You and I have had several conversations over the past couple of years. People in East Palestine, Ohio deserve better, a whole lot better. Hopefully nothing like that to that magnitude will happen in America today. But, train derailments happen every day. One's probably happening right now while we're talking here. Not as catastrophic as that one. We certainly don't want anything to come near to what happened there. So what happened here, brother? I mean, you've been working hard on this one. Tell me the story.
First, thanks for having me. What happened here is, wow, how to put that into words. A lot happened here. And to your point, it's been a long time coming. 3 years now since East Palestine happened. We have been pushing very hard. I got to give credit where credit is due. And I got to say that we got lucky where lucky certainly is. And Vice President Vance took up the rail safety charge right after East Palestine. Obviously, he was then Ohio Senator. In his fight to prevent this from ever happening again to one of his communities, he introduced the Rail Safety Act. That was his trophy piece of legislation, if you will. Fast forward a few years, he's now the vice president on a very quick path and trajectory to the White House. And we had our first real opportunity to move the now vice president's legislation via the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Package. Everything came together. We had support on both sides of the aisle, and the White House weighed in. Lightning struck, and here we are. Now, we still have a long way to go, but this by far is the biggest step we've taken towards meaningful rail safety legislation in a very, very long time. The first time in my career, and I've been here more than 20 years now.
So, Jared, let's boil it down here. What are we seeing in here? And from the conversations that I have had, and I'm sure you were privy to many of those over the years, it was watered down because the rail lobby, let's be honest, they're powerful. They got a lot of money. They got a whole lot of money, and they don't want to see all these protocols here that would slow down their profits. So what are we looking at right now in this bill?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the rail lobby super quick. You talk about how powerful they are. When you think about lobbying in Washington, D.C., you think about the original days. The first, or some of the first to do it, is the railroad industry. Consider the presidents all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. I'm trying to think before him that actually went across the country campaigning for their elections, and they did so on the back of a train. And then you start to see the picture of just how ingrained the railroad industry is in politics in this country. They've been here since almost the beginning, influencing elections, influencing decision makers, policy, all of that stuff. And so, yes, for a very long time, they have been fighting back not just our priorities, but really anything that attempts to increase the amount of oversight or guardrails, if you will, for them to act within. They believe that they should have the freedom to perform operationally as they see fit. They don't see the need for anyone to weigh in. And the irony here is we've had states taking action for a very long time, and every time a state makes a decision or implements a new law or regulation, the railroads immediately come in and sue, saying they have no right to do so. It's federally preempted. And now we find ourselves in a world where the argument's literally being made by the railroads that it belongs to the states. It shouldn't be done by the government. It's always this game of cat and mouse with the railroad industry, and they're just trying to find ways to sharpshoot and get around those guardrails that we need in place. Because the fact is, when you look at East Palestine, you look at the technology they had in place that they say improves safety, and you look at all of the things that was already in place by the railroads to make a safe railroad environment, East Palestine still happened. But to your point, derailments do happen every day. In fact, there's 3 major derailments on average every single day. Last year, even though it was the safest year in the industry, we had north of 1,000 major derailments. Compare that to the aviation industry. Do you think there's not a world where we could, as a country, could step back and say, well, we had 1,000 accidents in major airlines. That's pretty good. But somehow the railroad industry has convinced the world that their 1,000 derailments or accidents is a good enough standard because, hey, we're getting better. You don't need to regulate us anymore. What we're doing is good enough. And yes, we got lucky or get lucky every day that another East Palestine doesn't happen. But the fact is, every single one of those derailments carry enough energy, enough disaster within them that the next East Palestine could have already happened. We've just been really lucky that the commodities that were present in East Palestine haven't been present in those derailments. If we don't pass meaningful legislation, the next one is imminent. And you ask any railroader and they'll tell you the same. We dodge a bullet every day, but that will only last for so long.
Well, let's talk about the chemicals, the hazardous materials that are on many of these trains. From what I've gathered, this legislation includes new safety requirements for shipments of hazardous materials and increases federal oversight measures over those trains. Now, is it strong enough? Do we have any details on that right now, Jared?
Yeah, so it's stronger. I'll say it that way. There's always room for more, and I wish we were able to get more. But in the world of political negotiations and give and take or quid pro quo or whatever you want to call it, the full need for hazardous materials protections here was not gained. But we did make very good strides towards improving that in this bill. Long story short, you have more oversight on the transportation of hazardous materials, more transparency into what is being transported and when. A big problem in East Palestine was that they didn't know what they were fighting as far as the emergency responders are concerned. They had no knowledge of what hazardous materials were present, where they were at in the train, or really even how best to combat them. And the railroad took hours to get them that information, critical amounts of time that one could have protected the firefighters or the emergency responders themselves, but also the village of East Palestine. And then on the flip side of that, you also in this legislation have speed restrictions that are common sense restrictions that slow the speed of the train for certain quantities of hazardous materials or certain hazmat in particular, or whatever the commodity itself might be. And then you have a new designation for trains, that have a certain amount of hazardous materials. We call them key trains. And once you've been identified as a key train, basically what that says is you're bound by restricted speed limits. You're bound by a lot of other requirements with transport of the hazmat. And you're on just kind of a higher alert, if you will, as a train crew, knowing that your train in particular is more dangerous. So while it's not everything we wanted, this piece of the bill and the legislation is really, really good in the interest of safety.
Now, let me throw this at you. You know the rail industry. Of course, we got a long way to go. This is just a committee in the House. They're going to come back and say, well, if you're going to put all these restrictions when we carry hazardous materials on those trains, well, you know what? We're just going to have to raise the prices, and it's going to cost more for everybody. What's your response? You know that's going to happen. You know that's going to happen.
It's already happening. There were members of Congress that were parroting or echoing those talking points of the rail lobby, and it's nothing more than fear-mongering because there is no additional cost to it. Let's take the crew size issue as a very good example of what's happening here with the threats the railroads are currently making. In the Rail Safety Act, which was passed an amendment to this legislation, we have a provision that requires 2 people in the cab of the locomotive. And the railroads and their friends in Congress are saying, you're not going to be able to afford to eat or to live anymore because of this provision. But what they're not telling you is there's already 2 people in the cab of every locomotive on every major railroad across this country. there is zero impact to their bottom line. Zero, because they do it every day already. And then you look at the hazardous material stuff and the things that they're being asked to implement, it is minimal in scope to the amount of profits that they make every quarter. I mean, you're talking about an industry almost year over year that has record-breaking quarters over and over and over. I mean, they just keep repeating. Unfortunately, the only thing that's hurting the growth of the industry is the railroads themselves, because they're refusing service to customers. And it's hard to make that make sense, but that's the reality we live in. But now we have this legislation that's going to do something for safety, and lo and behold, you're not going to be able to afford to live anymore because of these changes, but the changes have no impact on anything they spend money on. Where there is some cost, like in the telematics piece, which is technology that's going to be put on the cars for hazardous materials, they're getting a very hefty federal grant or split of those expenses. And so they're just crying wolf is what they're doing, trying to find anything they can. They're throwing anything they can at the wall to see what sticks. And this is one of those pieces, but they're so far from reality, it's not even funny.
Jared Cassity is our featured guest on the show today. He is the National Safety and Legislative Director for one of the great unions in America. That's the SMART union, that's Sheet Metal Air Rail Transit, and it's part of the Transportation Division, which encompasses about 125,000 active and retired members in the country. We'll continue with Jared after this. Once again, you're listening to America's Workforce.
This is America's Workforce. More shows available at awfradio.com.
Founded in 1887, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters represents the employees responsible for tirelessly constructing and maintaining the national rail system in America. For more than a century, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees has proven they have what it takes to protect its members and meet the ever-changing challenges of the rail industry. Today, the BMWED continues to fight for job security, fair wages, better benefits, and safer, more modern work environments. For more information, please visit bmwe.org. The Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers are proud to be a title sponsor for America's Workforce Radio. The Insulators Union is leading the way in the mechanical insulation industry, fire stopping, and infectious disease control. Regarded as North America's energy conservation specialists, these professionals are known for their professional work and dedication. You can learn more about the Insulators Union at insulators.org.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where you can find more at teamster.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org.
Now, back to Ed Flash Ferens with America's Workforce.
And don't forget, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. Let's go back to our live line. Rejoin Jared Cassity, no stranger to America's Workforce. Been here many times on the show. He serves as National Safety and Legislative Director. That's smart-union.org. They're one of a number of unions dealing with the rail industry. I think there's about a dozen of them altogether. And the good news is this: the House Transportation Committee just about a couple of weeks ago adopted an amendment to the Rail Safety Act, to the what they call Build America 250 Act, that mandates 2-person crews on freight trains. That's good news. Also includes new safety requirements for shipments of hazardous materials. And we've been talking about what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, in February of 2023. And that was a bearing that went bad, and what happened in that one? Just refresh me and our listeners on that, because this is all part of it. Well, it should have been inspected.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of things went wrong here, but when you peel back all the layers of the onion, what you find is a bearing on one axle that went bad and became faulty, basically disintegrated en route, and ultimately caused the derailment. So, if you're looking for a root cause, It's the bearings failure.
So does this legislation mandate more inspections? And also, if you could comment on these, what they call wayside defect detectors to stop trains when there is a defect that's identified. They have the technology to do that, but apparently it's not being implemented, right?
No, that's absolutely correct. So on the inspection piece, there's a lot to unpack. One of the larger problems we have in the industry is that the railroads are cutting a craft known as carmen. They are considered the qualified mechanical inspector by regulatory definition. There's a language in the regulation that says qualified mechanical inspectors will be used to perform inspections, where present or where available. And when the regulation was written, it was never contemplated that the railroad would be willing to get rid of an entire craft that serves that purpose. But what they're doing is they're just now moving the carmen out of certain terminals or getting rid of them altogether, and they're forcing lesser qualified craft people to do that function. So that therein is problem number one. Problem number two is precision scheduled railroading, which has been in place now for roughly a decade, has resulted in a world where everything is hurried or rushed. And we got to a point where the railroads were telling carmen they only had 30 seconds to inspect a car. You're talking about a car that's 50 to 75 feet in length and more than 100 points of inspection that they have to be able to look at. And the railroads are only giving them 30 seconds. Managers will literally stand out there with a stopwatch and time them. And if they take longer than that, they face the harassment and the intimidation, or really what they face is the wrath of the railroad manager to get through it faster. You put those pieces together, you find yourself on train 32N, which is the train that was in East Palestine. You have a rushed inspection. You have missed points where traditionally they would have inspected the train. They didn't inspect anymore. And now you have a bearing that's failing. It's heating up. Friction is taking its place. It's metal on metal. And as some may have seen in the videos, you've got sparks, you've got fire, and then ultimately you've got catastrophe. The other piece to this is there's technology along the right-of-way of the railroad, if you will. It sits off to the side, and it's called a defect detector or a wayside defect detector. And what that defect detector does is it detects heat in the train. It's a pretty simple device. It's been around for a very long time. But if it senses an elevated temperature, historically, at least from when I started and anyone else here until the last 10 years, those defect detectors would sound an alarm and they would tell you, hey, you've got an axle that's overheating. You need to stop your train. You need to walk back and check it to make sure it's okay. But what the railroads have done in an interest to keep trains moving at all costs is they created a term called a false positive, and we'll get to that in just a second. And then they made it to where the defect detectors no longer communicate with the onboard crew in the locomotive, but rather it goes to a manager in some remote location where they get a notification via email, and then that person decides whether they should tell the crew to stop or not. East Palestine went over a defect detector. It pinged as hot. It should have sounded the alarm to the crew. It didn't. It sent an email to the manager. It went unnoticed. Went over the next defect detector. It was hotter. Major problem coming up here. Should have told the crew. It didn't. It went to the manager in a remote location. Third defect detector, it pinged the defect hot as it could possibly be. It went to the point of where it actually told the crew that the defect was present. And before they could ever stop the train, all hell was breaking loose behind them and the train was coming apart. Point being, the railroads purposefully silenced their technology or their defect detection equipment just so they could keep trains moving at all costs. And they say it's because of false positives, but there is no false positive in the railroad industry, because if you have a defect detector that tells you an axle is hot and you stop your train and a conductor gets off the locomotive and walks back to check it, there's beauty in that moment in that it takes time due to the train's length for the conductor to get to where the defect is, and that defect cools itself. So if I get back there and we have what's called a temp stick, and it's basically a glorified crayon, and you put that on the axle, and if it melts, it's a bad bearing. It's failed. The wheel is too hot. You have to set that car out. It cannot go any further. If in the 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes it takes me to get back there and I put that crayon on the bearing and it doesn't melt, then the wheel's okay. It had time to cool in me walking to it and in me walking back to the locomotive. But here's the beauty in the system. If we get to moving again and that wheel heats up and the next defect detector tags it again, I don't have to put a crayon on it. That car is getting set out no matter what because we know there's a problem. East Palestine went over the detector. It was silent. They never told anybody. They should have stopped therein. It would have been a cool ride to the next one. The second one would have flagged it, and East Palestine would have never happened. That's how the railroad industry has operated with defect detectors. I hired in 05. I know they'd been doing it through the 90s. And then somewhere in the 20s, 22, 23, they decided, we're just going to turn these off. We're getting too many false positives. We like that term. We made it up. And now we're going to take our chances, and you've got East Palestine. The craziness to this is that you would think they would not allow it to happen after East Palestine. It went away for like 6 to 8 months, and by God, if we're not back to doing the same stupid stuff again, and they're silencing these defect detectors, and they're turning off technological equipment that detects other defects, and they're pushing the envelope every chance they get to maximize the profit, to maximize the data for Wall Street, such as velocity, such as dwell, all of those things, and that's how they get to do it. They just ignore the problems that are present until they can't ignore it anymore, and that's why we have 1,000 derailments every year.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a cost to that, in fines and in court cases, and I get the impression that they figure, well, that's the cost of doing business. We'll just do that and just move on and continue to do what we have been doing. Now, this legislation that's in committee here, that passed in the committee, does it address all of that, what you just talked about?
So the majority of the inspection piece, not so much. There is language in there that talks about the time. There's not really too much language about mandating who's doing the inspections, unfortunately. We did get some good text in there that does improve the requirements on the qualified mechanical inspectors being the ones to do it, but it doesn't wholly come out and require hiring levels, if you will. But it does allow an inspector adequate time to inspect the equipment. And so we made significant gains in the inspection piece. And then on the defect detection, we've made very good gains there too. Again, it's not perfect, but we were able to set mileage requirements on average for how far the detectors can be separated. The one thing that's missing is determining what a temperature threshold should be. But all in all, I'm very, very pleased with the Railway Safety Act getting included because it does meaningfully address a lot of these issues. Again, it's not perfect, but it is quite good.
So, Jared, what's the next step here? We got a committee. Does it go to the full House? Well, eventually it's going to go to the full House. Do we have a timetable on all this?
That's the million-dollar question for us right now. Obviously, the sooner the better. I mean, this can't go quick enough. Rules Committee is going to have to weigh in to figure out what the rules are going to be on what amendments are going to be allowed in the process for the full floor. Once the Rules Committee has made their ruling and allows it to move to the floor, I mean, it's literally going to be up to the speaker and what he would like or when he would like to schedule the vote or allow for a markup in the full committee. I'm confident we have the votes in the House. I mean, really, if you look at the committee itself, I mean, we have the votes based on that alone, but we have more support that's out there outside of committee. So timing is the key. We're pushing. I would love for a July markup. They're going to be in recess in August, but the really looming piece to this is the surface reauthorization expires on September 30th, I believe it is. If they don't have it done by then, they're going to have to pass an extension, which at that point they will punt it into the next year after the election cycle. So time is of the essence. We have the White House's support here, and we're really hoping that they weigh in to help put pressure where pressure is due, and we can see what happens. But ultimately, it's Rules Committee, House floor, and then goes over to the Senate, and it repeats Commerce, Science, Transportation Committee, and then to the Senate floor from there.
Jared, I have one more question for you. You said in the first segment, you compared the derailments, and on any given day, there's about 3 derailments of freight trains in America, and that totals about 1,000 a year. Now, if that same kind of circumstance happened with the airline industry, nobody would be flying. Okay, nobody would be flying. My question to you, different standards for passenger rail than freight? I mean, you look at Amtrak. I mean, they carry, tens of thousands of people every day. Are there different safety standards when it comes to passenger rail?
There are. I mean, the class of track, the quality of track that it's allowed to ride over, the speed in which it can traverse. You know, the one thing about Amtrak is in the Northeast, they have what's called the Northeast Corridor, basically DC to Boston. Amtrak actually owns that railway system up there, and so they maintain it. It's a different ballgame. For the rest of the country, Amtrak relies on the Class 1 Freight Railroads network to operate over. But the regulations and the standards are greater than what happens in the freight industry. The way in which the FRA regulates Amtrak is much more genuine than the way they regulate the freight rail industry. And so there are vast differences between the two. And even like the NTSB and how they respond to freight rail accidents versus passenger rail accidents are vastly different. Amtrak, because it moves people, gets a greater priority above all else when you look at it from a safety perspective or from an enforcement perspective. You know, the short answer to your question is yes, they are quite different in how they're viewed, and they are quite different in how they're handled.
Good answer on that one. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about traveling over the summer months, and they want to hear that. It's so important. Like I said, when I started this podcast, safety is paramount. You got to be safe. The workers have to be safe. The people that use the trains have to be safe. And I'll leave it on that note. Jared Cassity, our featured guest on the show today, he is the National Safety and Legislative Director for the Smart Transportation Division. National website, smart-union.org. Great job on the show today, brother. You take care, stay safe, and I'm sure we're going to be talking more about this, okay?
Sounds good, you too. Thanks, Flash.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, the Communication Workers of America. That and more. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.